Woman, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. Tonight we're going to take a further look at an issue that's been around for a very long time. The issue is rape. My guest is Susan Brownmiller. Susan is a well-known journalist and author of Against Our Will, which is a 4-year study of rape. Welcome to Woman.
Thank you again, Sandy.
Susan, what is the female definition of rape?
I think any woman's definition of rape would be fairly simple. Mine is any invasion of the body by force, by whatever method, and that could include hands, fingers, sticks, foreign objects, the penis, any avenue, and there are 3, would constitute my definition of rape. As long as it was an unwanted invasion, I would call it rape.
What about a male definition?
Well, by law, the male definition has been considerably more narrow, starting with ancient times, where the male definition was restricted to the theft of a father's daughter's virginity, and a propertied father's daughter's virginity at that. Yeah.
What about women? You say that women are trained to be raped, to be rape victims.
To be rape victims, yeah. I spend a lot of time in my book talking about the female victim psychology, because I think when we start out as little girls, we get messages from the culture that tell us that there are frightening male figures abroad in the land and that something dread can happen to us. In Against Our Will, I use the image of Little Red Riding Hood, which I say is a rape parable if you stop to examine it. Because here is sweet Little Red Riding Hood making the mistake of going off alone into the woods to visit her grandmother. Now, what her first mistake was that she traveled alone through the woods, right? So, of course, the wolf is the rapist. Of course, since it's a children's story, the wolf eats Red Riding Hood and eats the grandmother. Now, both, of course, are totally defenseless because of this big male wolf's strength and cunning. But along comes the kindly hunter, another male figure, right? And he rescues Red Riding Hood and the grandmother from the wolf's stomach with just a flick of the knife. And so it's the male figure who is the threat, and it's the male figure who also rescues the 2 women. And at the end of this charming fable, Little Red Riding Hood says, "Oh dear, I will never wander off into the woods again alone as long as I live." She has learned her lesson. She has learned that there are frightening male figures abroad in the land, and little girls must be very careful before them. But with luck, a kindly male huntsman will come and help you because he will be patrolling these woods. That's the police figure, perhaps.
Do you recall getting that message as a child?
I sure do. I think I got it subliminally all the time. Yeah, I think I was profoundly affected by Red Riding Hood. I was profoundly affected by Sleeping Beauty, where the female princess must remain immobile and passive until the charming prince comes along to rescue her. Other images, too, which are perhaps a little too abstract to get into now. But yes, I think looking at comic books, where there were all these dashing male figures and young, very attractive women who were bound and gagged with their hands behind their backs, and they were clearly sexy. And I think young women, as well as young men, begin to identify their sexuality in terms of these popular images in the culture, and they are devastating.
Do you think Susan, do you think there's a uniform response to rape?
To the real act of rape?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I have spoken to women who were hysterical afterward. I have spoken to women who were absolutely numb. Some women reacted by giggling and laughing hysterically. I have a feeling that if some terrible act would happen to me, my response would be to giggle hysterically. That's my emotional reaction to stress. The problem, of course, has been that police tend to believe only the victim who is hysterical and crying, not the victim who is totally composed and passive. And I have spoken to women who walked into police stations and said, "I want to report a rape." And the policeman said, "Whose?" The woman said, "Mine." I said, "You? You don't look like you've been raped." So
I think one of the thoughts that goes through almost everyone's head who's had any kind of experience, whether it be street harassment or actual rape, is fear for one's life.
Yes, because when something is happening to you and you're out of control, you can only think that this is going to mean your death. Time and time again, women said, I thought he was going to kill me. One woman said, have you ever seen a rabbit or deer caught in the spotlight of a car? There I stood, transfixed. I couldn't do anything. I just knew this was going to happen to me.
Has a study ever been made on the response of victims, either on attempted rape or completed rape? Has anyone tried to figure out what was going on?
It's very interesting about attempted rape, because when I looked over the national statistics on rape and rape victims, I was struck by the fact that 30% of all rape cases turn out to be merely attempts. The act is not completed. And I asked some sociologists, what do you think about that 30% figure? Those women got away. Those women warded off their attackers. And one sociologist said to me, I never thought of that. It never occurred to me. But I think that we really ought to take heart in the fact that as things stand today, at least you have a 30% chance to get out of a dangerous rape situation without being humiliated, vanquished, and defeated. And if more women took courage from that statistic rather than from that odd, unusual rape murder that's just plastered over the front pages of the daily newspapers, well, then I think more women would be able to successfully resist.
Susan, you told a story in your book, which I can only describe as incredible, about a young woman who went out on a date with a medical student. Would you tell that again?
Yes, it was testimony I heard about 3 years ago. And it was one of those cases that just opened up my eyes. A young woman was on a date arranged by her mother and the young man's mother. The two had arranged that she would go out with this charming young NYU medical student. And he invited her to the school, to his dormitory. He was an intern, so he had his room there, and he invited her to see his room, and she went in. And no sooner had she gotten inside, then he threw her on the bed and raped her. I mean, she just was totally bewildered and she didn't know what was happening, but all she knew was that something awful had just happened to her. They got up a few minutes afterward, and he said, okay, now we'll go out to dinner. And she thought to herself, I can't tell my mother. I mean, my mother arranged this date through his mother. Clearly what I'm supposed to do is continue the date. And that's what she did. And it was only afterward that she could begin to accept what happened to her, was that indeed she had been attacked, and that she had carried on the charade because he had carried on the charade afterward of the dinner. I think that is incredible.
It certainly proves what you say in the book, that men have a definite psychological advantage.
Yes, they seem to. They well, it's okay. We'll even it up. They have been trained to win, first of all, and women have been trained to lose. They've been trained to physically move toward a stated goal, and we have been trained not to resist, not to fight for our own interests, not to figure out how to get out of a situation, how to get out of a no-win situation and at least survive. I mean, we can't win in a rape situation, but we can certainly avoid defeat.
Do you feel that there are similarities in the philosophy of pornography and the philosophy of rape?
Yeah, I do. This is not a popular position I'm now about to say, but I must say it is one I care about a great deal.
Well, how do you think women see pornography?
I think that the studies are very clear that women do not enjoy pornography the way men enjoy pornography. Anytime they've done statistical surveys of women's reactions to porn and men's reactions to porn, there is a profound difference in those numbers. And women seem to have a gut distaste for it, and men profess to enjoy it. Now, why is that? It certainly isn't that women are more backward sexually. I don't think it's that women are more prudish. I think it's that women understand on a very basic level that pornography is male hostility to women. I mean, it's always the female body that's exposed in pornography, and it's the female body that becomes the object for degradation, for amusement, all the contortions. It's all based on our naked bodies, not theirs. And of course, men view pornography with their clothes on, and they're looking at naked women. And I think it's part of the overall cultural ideology of male superiority that lends itself to the rape ideology.
Then I take it you don't believe there ever could be pornography for women.
I've tried to figure it out. I mean, there are some women now who are trying to get into it in the name of the sexual revolution, trying to figure out how we can make pornography enjoyable to women, how we can turn the tables on men. And I do not think it's possible, because pornography is rooted in power. It's male power over women. The object in pornography is to be used, humiliated, and discarded. And I don't think that women can turn the tables on men that way. I can't envision it happening. I can't figure out what those pictures would look like, what those stories would read like, and nor do I think it's anything we should try to do.
You're very upset at the sort of liberal position taken, let pornography stand because after all we're all for freedom of speech.
Yeah, I am upset because I think that the freedom of speech issue is exceedingly important politically. And I believe that political dissent is so critical to our culture, our society. And I think that the issue gets vitiated when you extend it to porn, because that has nothing to do with political expression. I mean, that's just plain obscenity, dirt and filth and all those terms. And I think it's just really playing games with the freedom of speech issue that I care about very much.
You had an interesting analogy in the book, the Nazi analogy.
Yeah, right. Yes, I kind of challenged the American Civil Liberties Union in my book. I say to them that if you were to walk down, and I use New York City, if you were to walk down 42nd Street in New York City and you saw nothing but movie theater after movie theater and bookshop after bookshop devoted to the systematic gassing of Jews or the systematic lynching of blacks, you wouldn't want those stores to stay there in the name of free speech, because you would tie it in with the Holocaust in Germany. You would tie it in with the terrible history of racial oppression in this country. But you can walk down that street and see movie theater after movie theater featuring nothing but the rape and sexual humiliation of women, and that you'll defend in the name of freedom of speech. And I think if perhaps liberals can get to understand that analogy, they might be able to rethink their feelings about pornography. Do you think so?
Yes, I agree.
Oh, you do?
There are several things that are always said about women in rape. She deserved it, she asked for it, and this kind of thing. You say in the book that you feel it's very important to continuously answer these so-called charges. You call them charges.
Well, they keep coming up time and again. These were always the excuses that men use to deny the truth of a woman's rape, and I think they do have to be dealt with in turn. Both rapists and so-called objective observers often will say, why, it was clear, why was she in his apartment? Why did she accept that ride in that automobile? Why was she walking down that street at night? Clearly she was looking for something. Why was she in that bar? And she was there because she was simply living her life, and why shouldn't she be wherever she wanted to be? I mean, why is there that special burden on women that we have to protect our own chastity? Indeed, shouldn't the problem be, I mean, isn't the problem that men are out to destroy and humiliate and degrade us by treating our bodies as property and by trying to smear our chastity? I mean, why is that burden on us? It shouldn't be at all.
In another book on rape, Diana Russell's The Politics of Rape, she says that sexual liberation without sex role liberation can get you raped. Is this what you're talking about in a way?
Well, I think I understand what she was saying. That indeed, now that there is a feminist movement, and that now women are assuming responsibilities and are doing things that formerly we didn't do, including working at night, which means you're going to be out on the street at night, including saying, sure, I have a right to go to a bar if I want to, pick up a guy if I want to. Sure, I have a right to hitchhike if I have to get from my college back to my hometown. I should be able to do that without facing the risk of rape. However, that's maybe what women are thinking. Men are kind of lagging behind there a bit, and I think they're still operating from the assumption that she was asking for it, she was looking for it. A good woman couldn't be raped against her will, and all those old myths.
Helen Deutsch had some very interesting things to say about rape, and she says essentially that masochism is an essential ingredient of femininity.
Yeah. I think that Deutsch was indeed such an heroic figure in the history of psychological thinking that I hate to always sound anti-Deutsch because I recognize her as a pioneer in so many areas. And indeed, I think she made profound contributions to an understanding of masochism. But of course, her field was female masochism. But I'm afraid she made the mistake of saying that what is must be, rather than what is doesn't have to be at all, but this is how women are conditioned. Karen Horney, who was always in opposition to Deutsch, did not buy the theory of female masochism at all. And for that, of course, she was drummed out of the Freudian movement. But Deutsch did believe, and she wrote about it extensively, that a woman's enjoyment of the sex act hinges upon her acceptance of pain. And further than that, she said that a woman's mission to society is service of the species, in other words, giving birth. And she said, interestingly enough, this is also fraught with pain. In fact, she saw a woman's entire life process as integrally connected with pain and hurt, and she included rape and rape fantasies as part of what was absolutely necessary to a woman's healthy psychology. Of course, I think it's quite the opposite, that these fantasies are terribly destructive to a woman's healthy psychology. She just got it all backwards, I think.
What about the beautiful victim syndrome that you talk about?
Yes. I have chapter 10 in Against Our Will.
I'll do you one better, page 278.
You did me one better. You really did. I go into what I called the beautiful victim because I feel that, I certainly know that I can speak for myself here, that as a child I quickly learned, and I only learned this because the culture was all around me and it told me these things, that there was something awfully beautiful about being a tragic victim. And that when something awful happened to a woman, when I would read a story of a rape murder in the newspaper always said the victim was attractive, the victim was very beautiful, the victim was a blonde, the victim was a brunette. And I began to make the connection, and I think that many women make the connection, that the testament to one's beauty is to have violence committed against us. And I can run through a whole gamut of female victims who were extremely beautiful. Camille coughing her last on the deathbed, Mimi dying of consumption in her garret, the Hollywood starlet dead of an overdose at age 28, the fashion model with the dark glasses who commits suicide. I mean, the list is endless. And the message we get from all of these stimuli is that beauty's beauty is confirmed by the beast, that to be victimized is to be beautiful.
You talk about Hitchcock and that whole syndrome.
Yeah, well, I was moved once by reading an interview with Hitchcock in which he said that he looked for a certain vulnerability in his leading ladies. And I thought, my goodness, he's talking about Janet Leigh. He's talking about Grace Kelly. I don't see vulnerability in them. I see all sorts of other things. And then I concluded, of course, as a woman, I wouldn't be looking for vulnerability in other women, but he did and men do. In fact, I think the whole Hollywood dream machine did. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting that what Hitchcock wanted his female stars to project was vulnerability. In other words, the feeling that they could be had. And that would not be a plus mark for me. I would like to see a woman who could not be had, who was strong, who could fight for herself. But clearly that was not the sexual turn-on for Alfred Hitchcock and the rest of the Hollywood movie makers.
Let's talk about the law for a minute, Susan. Do you think we have a system of justice that is really responsive to the protection of women's rights?
Not at this time, Sandy, but I think we're going to work toward it, we in the women's movement.
What needs to happen exactly, do you think?
Well, on two levels. One, there is the physical system of justice, which is male-dominated. I mean, the men are the lawyers, the men are the prosecutors, the men are the judges, and as often or not on rape cases, the men are on the jury, because there are still states that don't allow women to sit and hear cases of rape. Policemen are mostly men too. Naturally, an entire male system of law enforcement and justice is not going to be particularly responsive to cases of women being raped, because they're going to respond from the male psychology. They're going to believe all the myths that indeed women want to be raped, that she was asking for it, whatever. They have done this traditionally. When we get women in there in equal numbers, and I really mean 50-50 down the line, I think that we'll be closer to a system of justice that works for women.
That's revolutionary talk.
I think it's absolutely revolutionary. I mean it. 50% of the police and 50% of armies, if we're going to have we'll stop having rape and war if our armies had 50% women, I'll tell you that. That's one half of it. And I think the other half of it is of course, that the laws itself have to change, and they have to reflect the new female reality.
But even if we had the most perfectly formed laws and terrific enforcement, that wouldn't be enough, right?
No, I don't think it would be enough. I agree with you, because I do hate to say it, often a woman understands afterward that she's been raped. It's not a case that can ever be prosecuted in a court of law, because you could look at that case and say, why, there was no overt force, there was no overt violence. How did it happen? You can't come crying to the law afterward. There's a huge gray area of sexual exploitation that I think can never be adjudicated in a court of law. And the solution to that is to have women get so much stronger that they just don't get exploited anymore.
A lot of things we're reading and hearing now are focused on the punishment of the rapist. Is there, that you know of, a sort of feminist view of punishment?
Many feminists have devoted themselves to this question. And I go along with the theory that says, first off, we have to normalize rape penalties, because we're not getting enough convictions. And one reason we're not getting enough convictions is that in some states the penalty can be life imprisonment or death if the Supreme Court brings back the death penalty. I think for a crime that does not take a human life, I could never reconcile myself to the death penalty for such a crime. The reason that these penalties have been so severe, of course, are historic, and they have to do only with man's original concept of woman as his property, and reserving the stiffest penalty, the harshest penalty, for the intruder who destroyed his daughter's chastity, who destroyed his wife's chastity, or whatever. I think if the penalties for rape were normalized to perhaps a maximum of 20 years, juries would be more likely to convict. I think the sentences should run from something like 3 months, 6 months to 20 years, depending on the severity of the crime. I mean, was there more than one offender? Was there a weapon, a gun or a knife or a stick? Was there physical damage? I mean, serious physical damage, maiming? Was there emotional damage afterward? All those things can be added into the sentencing process. That's the first place to begin to change the law, I think.
Well, there's a great deal of confusion, first of all, about the definition of rape, within the legal system.
Yes.
And you claim to know why there is this confusion. In the book, you talk about the real
well,
reason.
I know why. It's not a claim. I rest absolutely secure in my knowledge. Until somebody comes along and writes a better book, I'm going to be the world's leading expert on rape. When you started with rape historically as the theft of a father's daughter's virginity, clearly you were just concerned with one thing, and that was protecting the virginity of a well-born daughter who had a high price on the marriage market. Therefore, the penalties for this crime were severe. As the centuries went on, men, in their wisdom, extended the definition of rape to include wives. Formerly, by the way, if a wife got raped, the crime was considered adultery, and both partners were equally guilty. There was no such thing as raping a wife until medieval law. Why, they even began to think that women who were not virgins could indeed be raped and their offenders should be punished. In the 13th century, a legal expert named Bracton even said prostitutes should have protection under the law, which was really a major advance, and indeed it's still disputed in some circles, male circles. So with that kind of background, we can understand the present-day confusion. Of course, the major thing is that under the law as it exists today, rape is strictly a crime of men against women. When men rape men, as they do quite often in prisons, the crime is not called rape, it's called sodomy. Yeah, because the original definition of rape had strictly to do with the woman's vagina, the man's penis. So I think we're coming a long way in our thinking now. I think people are willing to accept the fact that indeed men can rape men as men can rape women.
We have a very short time, about 1 minute, but how does that kind of rape, the rape that goes on in prison, fit in with the rest of what we've been talking about?
It's absolutely reflected. It's the same kind of power struggle. Instead of finding young, frail women to take out their anger and aggression against, the men who rape in prison take out their anger and aggression against slightly built, young, and attractive men.
They have a language, too, don't they, that's very sort of feminine. They use feminine terms.
Yes, they womanize their object. They absolutely do, and refer to the person they've humiliated in female terms. Yeah.
Well, some people see as an answer to prison rape, allowing women and so on to come into prison. We have 30 seconds.
I do not. Absolutely not. Because we're not going to bring in women as objects so that men can release their aggression against women in prison. I think that's horrendous.
Do you think we will eradicate rape?
Absolutely. I have no doubt about it. It can be eliminated as a crime within our lifetime.
Susan, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for watching. Good night.
Production funding provided by public television stations, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.